And I always say, so stories like this, and we'll see what we could do with the story. I could tell you my problem or my questions. I actually did do 2 classes on the Shemana Prakim. And if you look in this series on YouTube, it's like number 2 and 3 or 3 and 4. So, but I'll go back and give some context, and then we'll try to see the main thing where I am up to and trying to understand. Maybe we won't understand, maybe we won't, but we'll try. So, we're studying this soul thing, okay? Now, in general, there was a whole class just on this point, so I'm not going to repeat that, just referencing it. The soul thing is relevant to a whole bunch of different areas of the universe, of theology, of ethics, and all kind of things. So we'll make l'chaim for the other part of the soul.
This should break the meditation.
Get to this. So I told you, I have a friend, one of my sort of mentors friends came yesterday and said you have to stop giving classes, you have to make only for bringens. Like you sing, then you talk for 20 minutes, and then you sing more. Hello, Ezra. So we'll see if you mask into this shit.
I think really, just having nash and a little bit of alcohol. Yeah.
But the nash is for we'll see there's 3 levels. Nash is for the lowest level. Then the learning is for seichel level. Then there's the beyond seichel level, which is for singing. At least that's the theory. Or the below seichel, depends.
Okay.
You could have 1 cookie. Or a cupcake. Gute Nacht. Okay. Yeah, so it's relevant to a bunch of things, this soul thing. We were looking at it from an abstract level, just to understand what is going on, which is the way you said that everything has to be relevant. So the first relevance, according to me, is to understand what you're talking about, because at least me and other people that I know grew up or are growing up still in places where everyone knows a lot of things. Everyone knows a lot of things about the soul and a lot of drushas and treires, but nobody knows what the hell they're talking about. So if we try to just think about the most basic things, and that's why I go back all the way to ancient Athens or wherever, just have the most basic question. At least we should understand what the questions are. Then you can see different solutions that people have or different ways of figuring it out. But you really got to go back to the most basic questions. So that's the first relevance, and that's really the first thing that I do. But then, if you think about it more, I think we went through last week also all the kinds of parts of theology that it's relevant to, right? Mm-hmm. How it's relevant to all the Yidgam Mikrim. Yeah, we went through that. There's also famous saying on the Temple of Delphi, which was misinterpreted by the philosophers to mean know yourself, and the sense of know what you are, and that was a way of knowing God, apparently. At least that's how it was interpreted by certain philosophers. That's not what it meant, but that's what they said it meant. Not the sheet about this. Remember, know thyself. Mm-hmm. It's quoted in a bunch of Rishonim.
And it's wrong? The understanding of it is wrong?
Yeah, but there's not the sheet now, so I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to wait for a different sheet to find out what it originally meant. But the philosophers claimed...
everything I bring up.
Yeah, because you like bringing up the things that are not. The philosophers, starting with Socrates, claimed that this meant know what you are or what everything is. So, in any case, now another thing which is very relevant too, and maybe not the most relevant, I'll explain why, and again that this was a class about this, is ethics. Ethics is another way of saying Avodas Hashem, right? Or the point of ethics, meaning when I say ethics, I mean to say what a person is to do, right? There's just science or, what are you looking for, a spoon? There's upstairs more probably. There's science, it can be, what we call science, physical science, material science, it can be metaphysical science, just telling you how things are, right? And then there's what Aristotle calls it practical science, right? Science, the part of knowledge, which is not really about knowledge, it's more about telling you what to do, right? How to live, another way of saying it. Now, the soul was seen to be relevant both to all the areas of knowledge that we discussed, I think last time, why it's relevant to all the areas of knowledge, and of theology, which is a kind of knowledge or way of describing all of knowledge, and also relevant to ethics. And I gave this whole class, why is it relevant to ethics? Mostly because ethics is about what a person should do. And there seems to be a basic logic which says that if you want to explain what a person should do, you got to explain what a person is, for all kind of reasons. But in the most basic, I didn't give this whole class already. In the most basic sense is just because anything you want to do with something, you at least have to have some knowledge about what that something is. And in a more deep sense, in the Aristotelian sense, because what is good for a thing, now this is only according to Aristotelian ethics, but according to Aristotelian ethics, or Aristotelian metaphysics really, what is the good for a thing is to be that thing in the most complete way. Unlike like theological ethics, which say that what is good is what God says, like Euthyphro said, or unlike Platonic ethics, which are similar but not more separate. Aristotelian ethics is entirely this, right? So did I say this? A good person is the same, is analogous to a good car. Where did I say this? I didn't tell you the whole issue with a car. I'm going to say it fast. You have to tell me if I like literally repeating myself. You let me know.
Yes, we've gone over it before.
Yeah.
You can go over it again.
No.
I'm sorry. The first thing.
According to Aristotle, the good for anything is, so ethics is another way of saying the good, right? What is good?
But according to him,
the good is completely that thing. In other words, let me give an example. People want to know what a good person is. They end up with all kind of weird answers to what a good person is. But if you ask me what a good car is, it doesn't seem very hard to define what a good car is. We did this already, because a good car is just a car that does car things well. In other words, well, it depends what your car is for. But some people have cars for showing off, so that car has to be very showing off. But most people have cars to drive or to get from one place to another. And a good car is one that gets you from place A to place B comfortably and quickly, and all kinds of attributes that add to that. And that's a good car. And if you have a very good car, but it'll be very beautiful, but it doesn't drive, it would be a bad car. It might be a good decoration for your garage, but it won't be a good car, or a good something else. So knowing what a car is what allows us to define what a good car is, right? A good car is just a car that fulfills the function of being a car well. If someone is confused and he thinks his car's job is to be a paperweight, then he'll just make it heavier and heavier, but it won't drive. So it wouldn't be a good car, it would be a good paperweight, but that's not a good car, right? So I show you how in one object, right, you could have this object called a car, but you're going to be confused of what it really is, right? Or maybe what it's for, which is really what it really is, right? When we say the word car, we don't mean this colored thing that has glass. We mean this thing that drives, right? Although it might be the same physical object. And if you're confused about this, you're not going to know how to have a good car. If you know what a car is or what it's for, you'll be able to have a good car. And the same way, if you're confused about what a person is, a human being, so someone might think that a human being is something that's fat or big or has great size, and therefore what would be a good human being would be a very fat human being. So you've got to be obese. Yes. Let's say, I don't know if that's nobody really thinks this, so it's easy to realize how stupid it would be. Right? If just maximizing the mass of a human being, it would be the goal. Then you would got to eat a lot and try to become obese. And since that's not the goal, so that's not a health. Another word, health, by the way, is another word for good, if you think about it. A healthy human being, which is another way for a good human being, right? Health is a certain kind of good, right? There's other ways of being, parts of being a good human being, but at least health is a certain kind of good. Part of being a good human being is to be a healthy one. It's not healthy to be obese because people are not for maximizing the space they take up on the train, right? People are for, doing whatever people do. Going to doctors is at least, to have their body working correctly and be that. So therefore, a good human being is that. So going back to the saying, since the soul, now going back to connecting to the soul, since the soul, again, at least for Aristotle and maybe for others also, but in this way it's very tight like this, since the soul is just another word for what a human being is, right? Mm-hmm. The form of the human being or of the living thing that is a human being, but we get the details, but it's basically just what it is. So knowing what the soul is the only thing that allows us to know what a good human being is, right? A good human being is someone who has a good soul, right? So you might be confused, you might think a human being is identified with Plato. I mean, Socrates already said this. You might think that a human being is identified with his body, and then you might go around seeking a good body. But that would be wrong, because bodies are not what makes human beings human. What makes human beings human is their soul, and therefore you have to be, in other words, like Socrates said, you have to value ethics over success, right? And Mashgiach language is like Grachnius over Gashmius.
But we did describe once, and I don't know if this is maybe jumping the gun, that there's a difference between human beings and other things that exist, in that a car is all of it. Okay. So these are good questions. So now we can get into, so that's all. Now, therefore it's important for ethics to know what a human being is, at least in some level. So I have to give these two, and
for this is one class that we gave somewhere, I don't remember. Then, point 2, so if you're taking notes, you know how to make a space or a Parsha Psicha or whatever. I have to give 2 qualifications for this, okay? 2 qualifications. You need to know what a soul is in order to be a good human. If you don't know what you are, you can't be a good what you are. Very basic thing, right? And many people are confused, right, in many ways about this. But I'm going to give 2 qualifications. What are the 2? I forgot. At least one I remember. One qualification is that it's not clear that you need to know everything about what a human being is. Or another way of saying this, what was the other qualification that I wanted to say? You were asking me. Forgot. That
person isn't what he is. Like other things, or
yeah, well, wait. I don't remember. Okay. Okay, anyways, the qualification for this is, and it's important, it connects with the whole other class, which is that it's not clear, it's not, Aristotle would say it's not true, that you need to know everything about this. In other words, this doesn't mean that the science of the soul or what the human being is the same thing as the science of ethics, or like in other words, that all of the science of the soul is going to fit into the book of ethics. Some of it might, but not all of it, okay? In other words, we need to remember, we need to define which parts of the science or the philosophy, like just the truth of what the soul is, are relevant for ethics and which parts are not. So, in other words, there could be different questions. There could be various questions which are questions in one science and not questions in other science, right? This is the second, like, Agduma that you know for this. We would discuss this earlier, how there's this, like, separation of sciences, which is important to be able to understand anything. And which means like a kind of separation of concerns, right? In other words, it's true that in order to be, for example, in order to be a good dancer, you need to both have good legs and to learn the art of dancing. These are 2 separate things. There can be people whose job is to make people with good legs, known as doctors, and there's other people whose job is to teach people the art of dancing, known as dancers or dancing teachers or something like that. Now, these 2 people, for dancing, is composed of both of them, and sort of equally, right? You can't dance without legs, and you can't, maybe not without a healthy body in general, and you also can't dance without having the art of dancing. But that doesn't mean that these are the same science, right? It doesn't mean that the art of dancing is the same as the art of leg doctorness, whatever, health of legs. How do you call it? I don't know, this is probably a name for the doctor of the legs, right? Yeah, no, that's not exactly for dancer, right? There's like something more. Okay, in any case. And also doesn't mean the opposite, that a doctor for legs is a good dancer, right? It's different. These are different sciences which refer to the same thing, right? It's like what we discussed last time or on time, that there can be a separation in thought, even though if there's not a separation in act, or in the thing is the same thing. The dancing is composed of legs dancing, but the science of them are 2 different sciences. And another way of saying this would be that if you want to know the art of dance, you might need to know some facts about the physiology of legs, like don't break your leg, don't do dangerous things, and so on. But you probably don't need to know everything about physiology, right? And then and vice versa, right? The doctor needs to know something about dancing to help you be a dancer, but doesn't need to know everything about dancing. And the same way, in order to be a good person, you might need to know some things about how the soul works or what the soul is. And maybe you might need know some general things, but it's not clear, or it's not true. For Aristotle says explicitly that it's not true that you need to know everything. In other words, you could still be a good person without being like a metaphysician of the soul, as long as you know some things. Which things would be probably a good question to figure out which things exactly, and in which way do we need to know things and which way don't we. But at least it seems less important. The basic way we could see it simply is it would be less important to like get into all kind of details of like metaphysics, of like, does the soul work this way or that way, or what really is. Maybe it's enough to know just its actions or what it does or what its effects are. Might not need to know what it really is. Different kind of, and this is going to depend on your ethics. Different ethics are going to point out or take out different parts of the being and say this is the important one you need to know. And this is interesting. This concept is interesting.
Where's the hypothesis then? Like, where does it
start? Yeah, it doesn't start. Ethics don't start, famously. Ethics are just a thing, just a way of living. They don't really start. Or if they start, then they don't. I mean, yeah, according to Aristotle, ideally it starts somewhere. But that doesn't mean that for teaching it, I need to teach you the proof. And like anything else, I don't need to teach you the proof for you to be able to use it. You might not even be able to know how your soul works in order to use your soul, but you might need to know something about it. And we could also see how different ethical theories sort of pick out different parts of knowledge about the soul that are important, or leads them to different theories, or Just the other way around. If you have a different ethics, you want a different kind of soul. If you have a different kind of soul, you want a different kind of ethics. These are things that are very much connected, right? Like my example that I referred to last time was a book called Tanya, where he wants to give you a certain ethics or a certain way to live, but feels that in order to do that, he needs to give you like 10 chapters about how the soul works. And I think he also acknowledged that he's not giving you the full theory or everything about the truth of it, but at least enough for his kind of ethic to work. So you need to understand enough or have enough concept of it for it to work.
You say that Torah starting like the first few prakim kilo.
It's not about Yesod Torah, it's about Shemona Prakim. Because Yesod Torah doesn't do it for this purpose. He does it for the science purpose.
He doesn't do it as akdama to the rest of Yad HaChazaka. It's not. That's a different class. It's akdama to Yesod Torah has its own logic of its order. I don't think it would be an akdama to Chazdayas, and somewhat is, but he doesn't actually give the akdamas that you need, which is weird. But he does do in Shemona Prakim. So. I don't know if that explains the order of Sefer Hamada. It does explain the order of Shemona Prakim. I wanted to give another qualification. I don't remember what it was. So that's one qualification, that you might not know everything.
Is Aristotle looking for, what kind of understanding is he going into the Anima looking for?
No, the Anima is a science book. It's for knowing what it is. I'm thinking of the ethics right now, which would use some of it, but not all of it. And he explicitly says over there, well, we've explained this better in a different place. And it's not really for here. It doesn't make a difference here how you fall on that question. This is but that's not. I wanted to say something else, but I forgot what. So we'll move on. Another qualification for this. If I'll remind myself, you'll put it in that hole over there, in your notes that you're making now. Okay. So therefore, how did I get to this? Okay, so now we're discussing this soul thing. So now we ideally want to know the science of it. We're not here for ethics. Also. But one of the things we want to do is, like I said, we want to understand things. Now, I said we're going to learn Rambam, so I have to explain where I get to this. Now, the Rambam has different kinds of books, okay? So this is chapter 2. Explain you how it connects. The Rambam has different kinds of books which have different purposes, and he says different things in them, often about the same subject. And people are famously confused about certain contradictions and so on. But one of the important things to realize is that he very much believes in this kind of separation of concerns. In other words, he thinks that everything that you say needs to be said not more and not less than what is needed for the goal that you have in mind in that space. I gave this point once at length, right? In other words, if he's writing a Musar book, he might tell you all kinds of facts about the world, but all of them are relevant to Musar. He's not going to make a mistake. Ideally, maybe human, but he's not going to ever tell you anything that's just a fact, just like because you're curious. And vice versa, he's not going to give you more than what you need. In other words, when he says something might be somewhat inaccurate relative to a different concern, a different science, might need to be said in a different way, but he's giving it to you this way because of this reason that he's saying it, okay? So, therefore, and my general understanding now, there's 3 major books that he wrote, and I don't have a full theory of all of this, but the 3 major books are called Mishnah Torah, which is Halacha, but not only Halacha, but also, it's organized as an Halacha book, and secondly, it's organized as a book of Perish of all the mitzvahs, the halachas of every mitzvah, 613 mitzvahs. That's what Mishnah Torah is. And of course, he thinks that one of the mitzvahs is knowing the truth, or maybe all of the mitzvahs, but at least 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever of them. And therefore, he organizes it. So there's like a double organization, at least in parts of Mishnah Torah, that's in Sefer Hamada, which is organized to give you sort of the true order of the world, which of course is a mitzvah in itself, certain mitzvahs, I'm not getting into which ones. And that's why Sefer Hamada, for the most part, is his book where he, at least in a broad sense, is going to describe you the mitzvahs or the halachas of the mitzvahs, which is another way of saying all the facts about the universe. Okay, all of them, in a very general way. That's what Mishnah Torah is. And general Mishnah Torah is that kind of work. It's like universal. He wants to just give you, and he gives it to do it in the correct order. It's not an educational book. It's not written in educational order, which is a whole thing. It's written in the order of truth. So, for example, he would go always from the Klal Laprat, right, from the more general to the more specific, although that's probably not a good way to teach always. It might sometimes be a good way to teach, not always, and so on. Or it's also not in a practical order, right? So for example, I'm just giving this so you can understand what I'm saying. For example, if you read Shulchan Aruch or even the Mishnah, you'll see them often going in practical order, right? If he gives you Hilchos Pesach, he will start from, Shlish Miyam Koydem HaChag, and then what do you do the week before, and then most of the halachas will be organized in some kind of chronological order. The Rambam never does this, not because he doesn't know that people need to get halachas in this order, but because doesn't think that's his job. His job is to give you, what is Pesach, and there's 3 mitzvahs, and there's 3 mitzvahs have 14 halachas, and so on. That's at least his goal. He's not always successful, but his goal is to give them in the real order, not in the useful order. Okay, and that's true for his metaphysics too. So whenever you read metaphysics, he's trying to give things more or less in the correct order of being, not in the correct order of learning, which means that if you want to learn anything from his book, very hard, because he gives you the conclusion before the proof. Okay, there's a whole. I gave this sheet once about the different orders. Roughly. Aristotle's order of. This was one of Aristotle's big sayings, where he said that what is closer to us is not closer to mind, something like that. Anyway, which means that sometimes we teach you from Gimel to Zayin, where the real correct order is Aleph to Beis. Just it's hard to understand Aleph before you know Beis, so I teach it backwards. That's the basic. There's more deeper comfort with the basic reason. Okay, so that's one book. Okay, then he has another book called Moreh Nevuchim, which is Gishmai Kenhi, is a book for how do we define perplexed or lost people, and lost in a very specific way, which is, at least this is his official thing, lost in the way of not understanding how to reconcile the truth with the Torah, and he's going to give them a way to reconcile it. Okay, and it's very important that he says this openly, that is all of the point of that book. It turned to be used in many different ways, other ways. In other words, some people think that it's an apologetics book, which might be a sort of a definition, but that's not exactly his definition. Right, like proving the Torah. He's not interested in proving anything in that book. What he's interested in doing is doing a very specific thing. It might include proving some things, but that's not what his framing is. He's not, I'm going to prove you the truth of anything. I am going to help a person that's got this specific issue and help him in a specific way, which he thinks is the correct way and leads to truth and everything. But that's what he's going to do. In other words, if you're searching for proofs, that's probably not the book to write. If you're searching for the book that's going to disprove some other shitta, that's also not the book to find. There's other people who wrote that book. The Rambam didn't write that book. It's also not a science book, as he says explicitly, not a philosophy book. If you're searching for the way the world works, this is not the place to look for it. And he says explicitly, like I was explaining, if he quotes something, if there's some chapters with Moreh Nevuchim that are explicitly this, just like giving you some basic Aristotelian science, he says, don't make a mistake. I didn't write this because I thought I have to teach you Aristotelian science. I don't think it's my job to teach it to you. You've got to learn it by yourself, but it's not my job to teach it to you. And I don't think I'm the best teacher of it. There's better places to learn it anyways. And if I quote anything, it connects. It's me doing my purpose, which is reconciling truth with truth.
So let's say, capitulating it in a certain way?
Yeah, so he says, if he might be saying it in a certain order to be merames you that this is, if you read a pasuk that's going on this order, it's referring to this. And he doesn't tell you which pasuk it is, and you've got to figure it out yourself. But he does things like that explicitly, and sometimes he does the same to the pasuk. Like, I'm going to give you the pasuk in a certain order, and you got to understand that I'm referring. It's a very hard book to how do you call it, to be mefaneach, how do you say, to decipher, because of this being written in such a weird way. But he says it explicitly that it's written this way. But my point right now is that and people have used it because people have not had, and many people have not had access to his sources, not had access to a lot of things. It became used as a source of a lot of basic thoughts. A lot of, if you read the Rogatchover, all of his philosophy he read in Moreh Nevuchim, which is a very weird thing to do. Like, it's a mistaken thing to do according to the Rambam, because it's not a philosophy book. I'm sure most philosophical terms are there just because it's talking with philosophy, but it's not a philosophy manual. And he might be deliberately taking the philosophy backwards or whatever because it fits for his purposes, but not for the purpose of philosophy per se.
What would be the Jewish manual for philosophy, if there is any?
Philosophy is not a Jewish thing. Philosophy is a universal thing. It's whatever it is for the guy, the same one. And for Jewish philosophy, in the sense of Jewish theology, that's a different thing. I'm going to get to this.
Is there a Jewish person who tried to write actual Jewish philosophy?
Yes, people have tried. Some people have tried. I don't think there's anyone that is recommended, so I don't know. Halprin's Jewish Encyclopedia or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
What?
Give us an example.
Ruachen, whatever. Some of the Rambam students have tried to do this and so on. Yeah, there's random, but these are ancient science. Separable tried to do it, for example. Sefer Abayis explicitly tried to do this and for similar reasons, but whatever, just give me whatever. That's just not relevant right now. But these are not. And why would you anyways want to read from some, because it's in Hebrew? I mean, if you only read Hebrew, yeah. But if you read English, then why would you? Well,
no, because a lot of the philosophy can be learned in many different. With the bias.
Yeah, but that's the problem. I mean, the Rambam thinks that there's one true philosophy, not related to Yiddishkeit. But yeah, there isn't the answer. Maybe you shouldn't learn, then you won't have to have Moreh Nevuchim. But Moreh Nevuchim are people who were confused by the philosophy. If you're not confused, there's that's a different problem. Anyways, this is the reality. I don't know. There's different books, yeah. But there's not really Jewish books that are. There's not even Jewish. Okay, I'm stopping. Okay, discipline. That's the book of Moreh Nevuchim, and it's important to realize anything you quote for, like your Rambam's opinion. People, okay, on the third book, okay, these are the two books that we sort of know what their purpose is. It's also big nafkamina is that there's no book which the Rambam wrote. Like I said, he didn't write a book for apple jelly. He didn't write a book for how do we call it? What did I say? For philosophy or science. He also didn't write a book for letting us know the Rambam's opinions. Okay, very important. Everyone wants to know what's the Rambam's opinions on such and such. There's no book that the Rambam wrote for that purpose of letting us know his opinions. He might have been a person like other humans who likes to have people there might be such books, like maybe some random book that he wrote or some rant that he gave his students once or whatever. But that was not the reason he wrote any of his books, as far as we can tell. Even not Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah was not written in order to give us Shittas Rambam. I said this shit already. I'm repeating myself, it's fine. It's Shittas Rambam in Hilchas Shabbos or in anything. It was written to organize Hilchas Shabbos, and people have noticed this. So it also makes a difference of how to read the Rambam, but I'm not getting into halacha part. But there's no book to let us know. And the question that we like asking, which is what is the Rambam's opinion on such and such? It's a nice question, but the Rambam didn't write a book to answer this question. Obviously, he wrote things according to his opinion. I didn't say that. But the point of him wasn't to make his opinion transparent to anyone. There's different points, and those points might necessitate actually concealing his opinion or whatever. It might even be might even be conflicting with the goal of knowing his opinion. Nowadays, people seem. I'm just going to stop here because I'm not going to get stuck with this. Nowadays, people are very used to writing books or giving lectures and stuff just to let us know their opinions, and that is a stupid thing. Nobody should ever do that. It's a bad idea. Why would anyone care about your opinion? Well, if you got to help me, you want to teach me something, you think it's the truth, that's another thing. But your opinion is not relevant. Okay, and this is true in everything.
If anyone's teaching you anything, it is a form of their opinion.
I'm sure it is, of course, but that's not the goal. The goal frames it very differently. In other words, I'm going to stop here. It's a framing, I'm giving you a certain framing, and it's different than what we're used to thinking, so I can't elaborate. I know that you think differently. That's why I say. Now, there's a third book, which the Ram wrote for sort of, I'm such an akdumas, I'm never going to get anywhere. It's for, what is the reason for the third? The third major work, there's other small works. The third major work that Ram wrote, we really wrote before all of these books, was Perush HaMishnah, right? And Perush HaMishnah was written why? I don't know why, honestly don't know. But it's the closest to an educational book that I know that he wrote. In other words, this is the book that he wrote for children, or for Bachram and Yeshiva.
Was there a Perush HaMishnah before? Was he the first one to write a Perush?
There probably were, but I don't know. And he probably says in his Akdom and he gives a goal. I just don't remember what he says.
I think he says to consolidate the
one of the reasons was as a sort of prefatory work for his Mishnah Torah. And in other words, it at least becomes that. I'm not sure if that was his goal.
I think explicitly says he thought that, I guess the thing that he reiterates in the introduction to Mishnah Torah, which was to
but I'm not sure. He's trying to. Not sure.
Access. It wasn't to give people
possibly.
Halacha.
I don't know. He might say something, but I don't. Here he says, my point is, he does say. He thinks that the Talmud is too hard and he wants to explain the Mishnah. But what is the point? Okay, it's true. He gives four goals or 4 parts of his goal. One is to explain the Mishnah, because people say you have to look in the Talmud and that's very complicated and you don't know the meaning of any Mishnah. And he wants to give the halacha. But the third reading thing is interesting to me more now, where he says, I want this to be a preface for people who are starting their studies. And then the 4th thing is to remind people that already learned. Okay. But this is the place where he's the most teacher, as far as I can tell. There's like a kind of person called a teacher, or a mechanech, like in modern parlance. And the Rambam, at his greatest teacher moment, teacher in the sense of a teacher for normal people, not a teacher for like 3 people that are the elite, like is Perish HaMishnah. You see him acting as a teacher. He does a lot of work at simplifying things and explaining things. He doesn't do this so much in Mishnah Torah. You would think that it's the place where he explains things the most, but he doesn't actually. He's not. This is just me making stuff up, but that's my impression. He's not focused on making you understand things. In other words, he's not going to give you simplifications. Almost never does, by the way. And Perish HaMishnah, and many times, and certain times he does a great work at it, is give you like a simplification to explain all of these halachas in one like basic rule. Or he does a famous Akdamas to Taharis and Kachim, where he literally gives you everything you need to know in order to make sense of those halachas. He doesn't like repeat those Akdamas even in Mishnah Torah. Even if he does in a very condensed way, where it's like if you want to understand it, you have to read Perish HaMishnah. So this is where he's the most teacher. In other words, if you want to know like what he would want to teach you, that's where you want to look. That's not the same as what his opinion is, right? It's the same as what he wants to teach people. And you see him using this language many times in Perish HaMishnah, famous languages that people know, like I love to teach truth, I would love to teach theology, I love to teach truth, the truths about God, about the universe, more than I love anything else. It doesn't say this language anywhere else, because this is the place where he's being a teacher. Okay, the nafkamina from all of this, we'll see if there's a nafkamina. This is my general understanding of all these things. Now, this is why, if you want to like get a sort of the Rambam's intro to Rambam, the probably best place to get it is from that book, or like Shilat's version of his 3 Akdamas, 3 important Akdamas that he wrote in Perish HaMishnah, 3 Machshava Akdamas, right? There's Halacha Akdamas that are also important. That's only if you care about Halacha. Like if you want to understand the Karbonis or whatever. But if you just want to understand the Rambam's thought, these are the places which are the easiest, most approachable actually. And it's because he meant it to be approachable. It also means that it doesn't give his opinions, and also means that it doesn't give the truth. 3 different things these are. Now, why is this interesting? Let's go back to our subject. Now, in our subject, known as the soul, so in all these 3 places, at least in 2 of them, he discusses the soul explicitly, which are in Mishnah Torah, where he gives like the place of the soul in his basic ontology, basic metaphysics. Does not explain very much of it, and you can't understand anything if you don't like know what he's talking about. You're not going to get anything out of it. You might get some theology, and you might realize that he's denying a lot, whatever we discussed last week, but you don't really get the understanding, and he's not trying to. He's trying to like have the truth be in his book, and in a similar way to halacha, we discussed, right? In a similar way that he does in halacha, he just wants to have the maskana. He doesn't want to give you the proof or the reason or anything like that. If you look at Mishnah Torah and Mishnah, as we discussed, you basically don't get it. He's not, for whichever reason, he's not really worried. Although this is probably this we discussed last week, doesn't do this. At least I don't know what he's saying about it. But the place where he gives them, and the place where he does give the most explanation, the closest to an explanation about how the soul works, is in Perish HaMishnah. And why did he do it? So you've got one like cut off, like the Ram doesn't do it as part of his ontology, doesn't do it as part of his modern Nevuchim, answering this contradiction between science and Torah, which he should have, definitely should have. I don't have an answer for that question. I mean, I gave you last week my things about this, but he does do it, at least the closest to where he does it is in his educational work. So he does see it as part of an education in some way. Now, in what way does he do it? Which sort of connects with it being an educational work, in the way of ethics, right? So the only place where he gives us this opinion, although you could say that he does it in the Akdamat Perish HaMishnah, but it's also ethics. And which is in his Akdamat to Pirkei Avos, which the Rambam understood, and the Rambam very explicitly expanded the concepts and the meaning of Maseches Avos. And he quotes in the Akdamat to the Shmona Prakim or to Mishnah Avos how Rava Chazal, but Rava said, if you want to be a chassid, you have to do Milid Avos. And Rambam says, well, chassidus is really everything you need to be. This is a very interesting pshat that he makes, because there's a brayz for Rav Meir that says that chassidus brings Reach HaKodesh. And Reach HaKodesh is another word for prophecy. Well, it's not the same thing, but let's say. And which is another way of saying, and this is the Rambam doing, like assuming really radical reading of ethics and of prophecy, and just like reading it into like a pshat in Imam Chazal and such, like, he never noticed what he did. Because what he's doing here is, number one, assuming that prophecy is human perfection. Human perfection. Mm-hmm. And he explicitly in Moreh Nevuchim explains that this is the philosophic view and not the traditional Torah view. So it's not like they didn't realize. And
the Torah view
assuming
is withhold
this mission, exactly. The Torah view is that prophecy just happens to people. It's not what people are. And the philosophical view is that prophecy is people. This is Alpha Rabbi's view. Very radical view. Always understood to be a radical view, where prophecy is just the greatest perfection that a human can achieve to, but it's human perfection, not something that happens with God. It's something that happens to a human. In other words, prophecy is really the end of ethics. In other words, it's what a good life is. At its, we'll get to it. It's the same thing. In other words, you have to always remember, whenever we do these definitions, we're literally identifying one with the other. What prophecy means is to be a complete human. Now, what it means complete human is to be a prophet. The same thing. Prophet doesn't mean talking to God. Talking to God means this. That doesn't mean talking to God or God talking to you. Not in the way that it's traditionally understood. Of course, that means talking to God, because that's what talking to God is. Of course, this Mishnah is like Messiato, but it doesn't really mean that, the Mishnah. Just like Socrates twisted the saying of the Apollo, and the Rambam twisted the saying of the Prince Bayer to mean like this necessarily leads to that. And that's not, maybe that's what he meant, I don't know, but that's not what it says. Yeah, of course. Okay. He's explained this. Whole Shemona Perukim is explaining the theory of this, explaining how this is going to work. It's basically a manual for prophecy, right? Because he had this, like, not literally a manual, because he doesn't really tell you how to do it, but it's a explanation of the progress of a person from imperfection, from just being a human being, to becoming a prophet, which he now identifies with the project of Pirkei Avos, since Pirkei Avos is making a chassid, and being a chassid is, well, one step before, so maybe it's missing some part, but it's making you into a prophet. So Pirkei Avos is about becoming a full human from the beginning to the end. Okay, that's the understanding of it. And now, I don't remember where he says this, so, yeah. Now he does understand, and we have to. It says this in here in one of the Perukim, I don't remember which. He explicitly understands it this way, that there are really two levels of perfection. So, and this is going to mostly speak only about the first. And he understands that Pirkei mostly speaks about the first, although it references the second sometimes. The first is what he calls malas amidos in Hebrew, but virtue or ethical virtue, or what do we call it? Moral virtue. And the second is what he calls intellectual virtue, okay, or malas hasechel. In other words, you've got to be a good person ethically, like what we usually call midas tovos. And then after you have that, you could complete yourself by knowledge. And of course, Pirkei Avos doesn't really talk about knowledge, and that's like nevuah. In other words, that's the nevuah that Pirkei Avos is skipping, because he says this explicitly. I'm just explaining. Almost explicitly. If Chassidus mevil derech hakodesh, nir hakodesh is another word for prophecy, or kind of prophecy. He does have rech hakodesh being different prophecy. Then, what brings to prophecy is what brings to knowledge, and what brings to knowledge is having complete virtue, or human virtue, or what he calls bodily virtue. But it doesn't mean bodily; it means social virtue, or really mostly social virtue, political virtue, political in this world virtue. And then, if you have political virtue, if you have a virtuous city, a virtuous person, then you could start studying. You can open a yeshiva, and because you're going to have, nobody's going to steal, and you're going to be able to open a yeshiva. That's my basic understanding of it. If you have a good palace, right, a good city, then in that city you could open a yeshiva, and then that yeshiva they'll be able to learn, and then they'll be able to become neviim. So that's. First, he should have a good city, Pirkei Avos, and the Rambam also understands. By the way, very important. Though this is another discussion. The Rambam understands Pirkei Avos as being part of Seder Nezikin for a very explicit reason, because he sees it mostly as Musar HaShoftim. In other words, it's not a personal virtue, and the Rambam doesn't really believe in personal midas tovos. He believes only in social midas tovos, because midas tovos doesn't. There's no point in being not having caste just for yourself. There's no use in that. The use is that your wife. There's no use for you. It doesn't help you. It helps your wife or the people around you. And he explicitly sees all midas tovos as completing society, not as completing your part. Of course,
you need some internal work for that. But the goal of the end of it is not in yourself; it's in a social context. But he doesn't think that humans can exist without a social context. We discussed that in different ways. So therefore, it's important. But that is all a preface to Ruach HaKodesh, which is studying actual wisdom. And because it's obviously not about actual wisdom, although it praises actual wisdom, it doesn't talk about it, right? Actual wisdom is in Sefer Amada, but not in Ruach. And that's what Ruach HaKodesh. That's his context. That's the general context. And that's why Shemona Perukim more or less goes from describing the soul in the first chapter and the second chapter to describing what would be a good soul in the moral sense and the bad soul. And through that he starts describing, especially from Perek Zayin, I guess, starts describing how this is what allows prophecy. That's the sort of like the ascent of Shemona Perukim. Very explicitly ascends from all the way from the bottom, really, from physical health even, through having moral health, through having intellectual health. Well, he doesn't discuss that, but at least the conditions for that, which are having perfect midas, and then you could be a prophet. That's the basic mahalach, and he understands this as the mahalach that Pirkei Avos is about. Of course, Pirkei Avos is aphorism, so it doesn't like describe this at length, so that's why he has to do Perukim before of it to explain. But then, actually, if you read his parasha Pirkei Avos, you see him identifying many of the Mishnayos with the ideas that he explained in the preface. Okay, that's the context. Okay, now, showing Atkara context. So now, for this context, we need to read some of what he says. It's going to be a whole different sheet, but we'll start. So now, his first chapter, if you have a text, you could see it. If you don't, you could find somewhere. His first chapter starts with the soul. Now, I wanted to talk about one thing that it says here, so we'll see if we... He explicitly says, just so if you want to see what I said, he explicitly says in the second let me see, do you have a paper? There isn't more of these papers? Are you leaving? There's more of them if you need. This thing, I don't remember if I had paragraphs correctly. Yeah, in the second paragraph it says what I said, right? So really this is like the reason for him getting this whole thing, where it explains, and we ran through this once, I think more, where he does this analogy. And for him it's not really an analogy, it's an analogy because it's referring to a different part of the soul, but it's literally, really works the same way, metaphysically. In other words, it's a very good analogy, which is that the Kanamidis is Ripay HaNefesh, right? The health of the soul is the same as having virtue. And therefore he says, just like a doctor who heals bodies needs to know something about the body. And again, this is, right, if you heal the body in some particular thing, you need to know more or less, like if someone's hand broke, you wouldn't really be able to fix it if you don't know what hands are for. Which really means you need to know everything about the person. Well, not everything, but at least enough. You might think that hands are for, I don't know what, and therefore a broken hand is better, right? That's really what he's trying to say. So not only do you need, of course, you need to know how the bones of the hand work, to put them back together. You need to know the ideal. That's not what he's only talking about. You also need to know what it's all about. Like, what is a hand for? Well, a hand is for picking things up. Okay, if you can't fix things up, then it's broken. If you don't know what, then you don't even know what makes it broken, then you can't do anything. And of course, you need to know something about more information. You need to know, what things make you sick, what things make you healthy, and so on. And therefore, it's the same, according to the same analogy, if you want to heal the soul, which means having good midas, you need to know what a soul is, what a soul is for, and what it is in general in its parts. And then you'll be able to know what makes it sick. Just to be clear, when he says ma yachla is ma yavriya, what makes it sick, what makes it healthy, he also means, at least also definitionally, right? Not only like he's going to give you some information. That's why it's not about information. Like you need to learn that if you drink bleach, you're going to be sick. Okay, that's of course that's what a doctor is. But you also need to know what health is, not only what makes you healthy. And then you'll be able to understand if health is, being able to run. Then what causes you not being able to run is not healthy. If you might think that something else is health, right? Then you don't even know what is for, right? That's why. Nowadays, nobody knows what mental health is, right? Because nobody knows what minds are for. So mental health becomes just like a political thing that the DSM decides every few years. Okay, that's a different sheet. So now, because of that, and this is the second paragraph, but we're going back and forth for some reason, not right. He starts off saying like this, and so therefore he's going to give you this general account of the soul, human soul. And it says like this, yeah, you can go. Bye-bye, good night. And you're dismissed. I don't know, you asked permission. Enjoy.
Just having the grade later?
No, I didn't say that you get a good grade for going out. I just said that you can go. You have to be medayek. Yeah, so he says like this, and this is how he starts. Now I want to talk a little bit about this. This was the question that I said I answered since it's already 10 o'clock, I might as well. He says, you need to know da. By the way, whenever the Rambam says da, but this is not only here, but in general, people like using it. You know, Rav Nachman likes doing this da and other people. But in the Rambam, this might just be a way of talking, but it's really showing you what we just said, that this is him teaching. When I tell you no, it means I want you to know this. It's not, well, this is the truth. It's not like, well, this is the truth. This is just a fact. I want you to know this because it's going to be helpful for you to know this, so please know it. And some people claim, at least in certain, I don't know if it's true in this context, whenever he says this, it means this is not really true. I just want you to know this. But that's not really, I don't think that's going on here. Sometimes it might be in other contexts, it's true, but here I don't know. But at least...
Backwards logic. Every time it should be like that already? That's
no, because sometimes, why you think it's random? Maybe it's random. Like, why some chapters start, I mean, in sometimes he like says a thing, like, know this, and then he's like, the next thing he just says it.
So he says,
it seems to be superfluous to like, start a chapter in a book. No, I mean, yeah. What else should I do with this? Like, put it in my pocket, fold it up, print it out. Like, what should I do? Yeah, I should know it. I mean, what else should I do with it?
Well, it's never clearly, never probably. That's I would assume.
Maybe if that works, then. Okay, I don't know. I do think that this shows him being a educator, and people that write this generally see themselves as educators. You know, it's important to realize, like, he's trying to talk to you. So listen, like, please know. If you got to get the right vibe, like, otherwise you don't know how to read it. And he says, what he starts like this: Nefesh Adam is Nefesh Achas. Okay, human soul is one, but it has different actions, different activities, and therefore we sometimes call it, in other words, unprecisely, we call them different souls. And this is why some people think, mistakenly, that people have many souls. Like, who thinks that? Doctors. The famous doctors, in other words, Galen, and the head of the doctors, I don't know who the head of the doctors is, it might be Hippocrates, or might be Galen too, but it's probably not Plato, although Plato said this, and doctors took it from Plato, sort of. But the doctors and even their head said, or started in his book, so we have to find a book that starts like this to know exactly the reference. I'm not the only one that doesn't know, I checked, people don't really know, it might be, it's Galen or Hippocrates, who started and said that there are three souls: natural, chiyuni, whatever that means, living, and nafshi, or soul, I don't know. How does he translate it? Nobody really knows to identify these things because we don't know entirely who is referring to. But we do know more or less the theories, that Plato's theory, I know. And he says like this. So he's just quoting this doctor. Sometimes they call them powers and parts, and we could say parts of the soul. No, that's also wrong. So what he's basically saying is that the philosophical truth is, there's only one soul. It does different things. And we could so in other words, if you hear someone saying three souls, you might even find Rambam himself saying this, that's speaking inaccurately. You might speak this way sometimes, but it's wrong. They're just referring to activities of one soul. Okay.
So he means that one body has different functions.
No, activities of one soul. Whoa. Ich weiß nicht. This is what first I tell you what it says, then you tell me what it means. Tell me what it says, okay? Then it says another thing, that we could also call this parts. If you find someone saying souls, he's wrong. Either he's wrong, like he's a doctor, a Platonist, doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's speaking inexactly, right? Which happens too. Okay. Second thing. Yeah, sometimes you're not, and again, like I said, we don't always have to be accurate because of our purposes. If I'm trying to explain you something and you're dumb, you're not going to understand the activities of one, I'll tell you three souls. As long as you understand them, for my purposes, it might be enough, right? Mm. Then number two, sometimes we hear people talking about parts of souls. These activities or powers, we sometimes hear people call them parts. That is also inaccurate or wrong if you think that they're actually parts. Now what parts means? A good question. Now, but what it really means is activities or powers, which are different, but they're all powers of one soul, or activities of one soul. Even if you see philosophers saying parts of soul, they do not mean parts in the sense, what it says here, that they cannot be separated, like bodies can be separated, but they are parts in the definitional sense, right? They do different things. So these are different meanings of the word part, right? Part can mean something that I can cut up in sort of space. I can have one part be here, one part being there, and this denies that. The soul can't have parts who are in space, in different spaces, or even if you sort of say the soul is in the body, it won't be. There's not a part of the soul.
Mind. I mean, I get to use a stupid modern analogy, but
if it's a mushal, if you don't mean a part of a mind, you mean like an argument that I have.
Meaning that person is a part.
Sometimes thinks.
Right.
Okay, that's what it says here. Okay, and then if you go all the way, then he goes and explains what these parts of the soul are. Then, he says another thing. Let me see if I want to talk more about this. The next part also, okay? There's 5 parts. I'm not going to go through the 5 parts right now. And I want to just talk about this, if there are parts. Or at least try to understand what he's talking about, because I don't know. And then he sort of goes back and says, we already said, I don't know when did he already say this, I don't know, that I'm talking about a human soul. And this is another thing that's important to him. Now we need to understand this. Was there 2 things? I think that people confuse this. Let me try to see. Okay, so we said one thing, that there's one soul, there are different activities. Don't think that there's different souls, and don't even think that there are parts of souls. Okay, although they're parts, but in a different sense of parts. So they're activities, in other words. And also, don't make another mistake. Okay, don't think that. Well, this sort of comes out of the first thing that he said, that there's only one soul or one human soul. Okay, he says we're talking only about the human soul. So, for example, if you hear that there's the nutritive part of the soul, right? Chelek HaMazon, there's a sensing part, there's the imagining part, there's a Chelek HaMas'orer, which I don't know how to say in English right now, passionate part maybe, and there's the intellectual part. Don't think that the nutritive part that a person has is the same thing as the power that a horse has. Although he does have a nutritive soul.
Example, right?
What? This is?
The light.
He gives the light example. Okay, he says, although they both have a nutritive soul, they're not the same thing. They just have the same name. They're homonymous, right? Mm-hmm. He uses that word. They're the same. And he gives this example, but the example is not a precise example. I think it's just an example for things that being able to do the same thing without being the same thing, right? This example, and it's not, in modern terms, this example is totally wrong. But this is a very good way to notice how they think differently, right? Because he thinks if we can have 3 dark places which were lit up, right, by 3 different things, and those are just called being lit up in homonymously. They just have the same name, but they're the same thing. Different. Exactly. So if the sun, well, I don't know if the lighting is different. A different thing happened to him. Now, what he's saying is not that. Well, you could say that it had different. It had
active lighting.
You could say that it has different cause, but also he wants to say more than that. He wants to say that a different thing happened, right? So when the sun shines on something, that's one story that happened, one thing. When the moon shines on something, that's another thing. When a candle shines on something, that's a third thing. And he says explicitly the difference is that the cause is different. Okay, in other words, the thing that did it was different, right? And in the same way, now this is interesting because then it's not clear what he's even saying. I don't know what he's saying. In the same way, the nutrition of a person was done by the human soul, and the nutrition of a horse was done by the horse soul. Both are nutritive souls, right? Or not.
Well, they both souls.
They do the same thing, but they're a different thing. That's very weird because Maila, the sun, at least does other things, like it's bigger or whatever than the moon or whatever. It has all kinds of differences where I can understand what the difference would be, at least between the sun and the moon, making it light.
Yeah, this because he believes that the human soul does other things. So
and then he says after, but we'll see.
Doing other things.
Okay, I think so. Well. I'll tell you what I don't know what he means. And then he finishes it off. I have to say this because it's important to at least even identify what he's talking about. And then he says, to understand this is in niflamad, whatever. It's an amazing thing to realize. Many philosophers, well, he doesn't say philosophers, he says mispalsifim or pretend philosophers. It's a very like he does it in that way explicitly. In English would be, how do we do something like this in English? No, but when he says mitpalsim, it's like we have a. I'm trying to explain you the grammar of how it works. Like if you could, he does this sometimes.
You mix up a letter for like.
No, not mixing it up. They're making themselves philosophers. That's the literal translation, right?
Not doing philosophy. Trying to.
They're pretend. Not like I say in Lashon Kodesh. It works like you could be a
every time I do mist, I mean, it's just a lashon mispal, but it can sometimes mean pretending. Like I could be how do they do? I could be Aravi or I could be a mis Aravi, right? And pretend Aravi. I'm making myself, because if I'm making myself, I'm not really, right? So when you say mitpal sefim, it could just mean doing the act of philosophizing, but they're philosophizing themselves, so they're pretend philosophers. It works in Hebrew. I don't think it works this kind of grammar in English.
I realize that's where it comes. That's where it's
yeah, it's making yourself. Or there's other words after. Remember, there's better words. He's doing it to himself. He's pretending.
Right,
in English, it would be pretending, but it's oseh et atzmo, exactly. Oseh et atzmo is just a long way of saying miss, right? He does this in other places. I'm trying to remember, like miss. Yeah, like a rofe, mitrofe would be a pretend doctor, right, or mitrape would mean to heal yourself. Right. That's why it means both. It could mean both. We use it this way. I don't know if there's more words. I'm trying to remember. I remember better examples for this.
Lahit in general is to
pretend sometimes.
Yeah, something.
Anyways, and he says that therefore they say weird, strange, stupid, bad, whatever exactly you translate this word. It means something like, I don't have the original here. He translates absurds. That's probably a good translation. Absurd things or bad things. This is important. I'll explain you what. By the way, I think he's talking about Gilgulim here. That's my impression today. I didn't see anyone say this, but I think that's what he's saying. I'll explain you why. Explain you why. So this is weird. Now I'm telling you something really weird happened with this shtickle Rambam, which is that I've seen many people saying many things about it, and they're all nonsense. Well, it's not so weird to happen, but even people that should know better, or usually know better. I have these two people, Sarah Breslevi and Yitzchok Shilat, both have a Perish on Shmone Prokem, and both of them say things here that are nothing to do with what the Rambam was talking about, as far as I can tell. They say things, you could look what they say, I don't find them to be safe. I don't think that they're correct. You could find like all kind of Kuknik, but people have all kind of weird things that they quote, they claim the Rambam is saying here.
Which part?
This thing where he insists that a human soul is not important. In other words, let me just finish.
Is it just the hemshech is that you start off saying that?
This exactly. This comes from the other. In other words, we have assuming. I don't remember if we did this, but we remember that he's assuming the fact that there's this level. That he has this hierarchy. That's what he gave us before, right? That's why it's certainly a little confusingly, but he's assuming that there's these at least five or three levels of human activity, of human life, right? Human life has different levels, right? We do the same thing as plants do. This is Aristotle and Plato, and everyone noticed this. Okay, we do the same thing as plants do, we do the same thing as animals do, and do things that only humans do.
We plant differently for Rambam.
Wait. But let me give you what everyone we don't this sort of these three kind of life. Like Aristotle sometimes says life is said in different ways. There's three meanings of the word life, which all come together in a human being, but they're sometimes separate, right? Or at least in some way separate. We'll get to this. These are obvious. We're assuming this, right? There's nutritive life, there's vegetative life, below that there's feeling life, sensing life, there's intellectual life, maybe there's something beyond intellectual life if you ask some other mystics, but that's the... Yeshivach is beyond intellectual life. Oh, the Kuzi, no,
it's the same idea, no?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. Watch the Tahara of knowledge, yeah.
Might be, I don't know. Okay, not sure, possible. Well, let's just say, okay, I'm not sure. Yeah, because it says something else. I don't know, but not really. Okay, point is, this they're all assuming, right? You know this, right? Now, the question is, how do we understand this, right? What does this mean? Now, he's sort of comparing two theories, one against the other, right? Theory number one says these are three souls. This is Plato's language, and this is language of Mekabolim talk to this day, right? There's three souls. There's Nefesh Bahamas, there's Nefesh Lakis, there's Nefesh this, there's Nefesh that, and so on, okay? Now, if there's three souls, then one thing that this means is that the lower human souls, right?
Is identical with the animal.
Exactly. Because at least the soul in the sense of the life of the body or the nutritive soul is the same thing because there's doing nothing other than that, right? There's like the shtickle soul that, and Plato literally said that it's separated in space. This is what he's denying here, right? Don't have kecholeka gufes. They don't separate themselves in space like bodies. Bodies have parts.
For Rambam, this part is only perspective.
Wait. Bodies have parts, right? Bodies have parts in the sense that they
different parts of them exist in different pieces of space, okay? Well, that's a backwards way to say it for Aristotle, but the point is they're separated spatially, right? They could be, one is higher, one's the other. And Plato, and these people say things like this about the soul, right? Some people say, like they say, and it says in Etz Chaim, it says in Plato, the nutritive soul is in the kidneys, and the sensing soul is in the heart, or it doesn't have the same language, this is Aristotelian language, but whatever. The point is, one soul is in the heart, one is in the kidney, one is in the mind, in the brain, and so on. Right, and now, according to that, like if you see it this way, right, if you see it this way, as three souls, three different things, three entities, they each can exist separately and so on. So the human life, or the lower human life in the sense of your body working and your body growing, is the same exact thing as a dog's life, right? Now, I'm pretty sure that the bad thing that comes out of this is that you could be megilgal in a dog.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, because that part just goes.
Someone asked me today if the Rambam mentions Gilgal. I think that he is mentioning it here, and I'm saying this because Aristotle uses it this way. Aristotle says that this is Gilgal is an absurd that derives from thinking this way. It's not the Rambam. I'm not making it up because I'm putting it. This is a Duva Megillah. It's an absurd. He thinks it would be absurd. Transmigration, because it's absurd for a human to be an animal. Yeah, there's a reason why. No, this is absurd because there's a reason why it's absurd. I explained to you already. No,
it's absurd first. Absurd.
No, it's not absurd because the human is an animal. That's not philosophy. No, it's absurd because that means that there's nothing that really explains why a human is human and why an animal is an animal.
Well, there is, because this is.
Soul.
Yeah, why is this human, but there's nothing that connects these two souls, right?
Okay.
What is explaining the human stomach having a head on top of it? These are two irrelated things. You could cut them up, and you literally do metaphysically cut them up if you're a Platonist. Well, the Platonists actually do claim that they have an answer to this. They end up finding some glue to connect them. But Aristotle at least claims that this is weird because then your soul doesn't explain anything. The whole reason we have a soul that explains human life or explain life, but your soul doesn't explain life at all, because if one soul can be in something else, then it doesn't explain this life. It explains life in some weird way, but it doesn't explain this life. And you don't have anything that explains why a human lower soul would have on its head a human mind. Like, how do these things connect? Why?
The whole form of the whole thing.
Exactly. You could find Platonism has always this trick of adding levels in between and above things to solve problems.
For Aristotle, you just want the form of this.
But Aristotle thinks that's like, why would you do that?
And there's only going to be meaning.
This is what he says. This is why it's absurd. It's not absurd because it sounds silly to say that Pythagoras was Megillah and a dog, like they said, or whatever. That was a joke that people. That's what I heard in the thing. And I mean, there's like a Pythagorean story that Pythagoras heard someone hitting a dog, and it was said, "What do you mean you're hitting your uncle?" or something like that. And the Handige Chassidim of Pythagoras said that this story was made up by someone to make fun of Pythagoras, because obviously it doesn't make sense. No, he didn't really believe that, but I don't know. Point is, this is absurd, but it's not only absurd because it sounds silly. It's absurd because it means that your soul is doing nothing. Its explanatory power is not. It's waste. It's a waste. Like it does. It's just a thing that we should believe, but it doesn't actually explain the question that we got to the soul in the first place. So this is why it's absurd. I think that this is what the Rambam is referring to. I don't have any proof. Like again, Rav Shila says, well, this makes you think that he says all kind of random Musar shmuz and they have no shaykhs with anything, and so do many other people that I've seen explaining this chapter. And like you shouldn't say that you're conflicted because you're not conflicted. Whatever. That's true in some sense. Well, we get to that once, but. He definitely means that some metaphysical opinions that are very bad come out of this thing. That's one thing. So that's not what he means. That's might be the result that is referred to, right? And therefore, against this opinion, against this theory of three separate souls, he gives you the opinion of the one soul with separate powers or separate activity that does different things. But it's one thing that does different things. What I don't have a full explanation of is what that even means, to what kind of difference is it that being one thing would do different things. In other words, where he says that therefore a human, I could try to explain it based on Aristotle, but maybe 10, 15, so I'll get to it next time maybe. Maybe I'll understand better by next time, but I'll get to give you the question sort of. So so he gives the theory of there being one human soul who does a lot of different things. In other words, but it's not like his example, it's of course,
in a single way.
Different things can do the same thing, right? Like his example of the sun, or like, I could move this cup and you could move that cup. That doesn't make us both the same being, although we have the same activity, right? So, of course, he's not denying that the human activity of
of growing.
A car and an axe could both break a rock in half.
Exactly. I was thinking. I was driving my car, so I was thinking earlier that a car is a very good paperweight. If you think about it, but. And I mean, it really has that activity. Not only that, now I'm going further. Not only does it have that activity, it needs that activity to be a car. That's what connects it. What I was trying to get at is, okay, we have like a metaphysical formula that says it's the same thing. Thank you very much. But we have to explain in what sense it does can. Now, the same one thing means for him can't exist without the other. If you remember, right? That's what inseparable means. Now, in what way can't it exist without the other? Obviously, it can exist without the other, but Aristotle says this only goes one way, and this is the chapter 2 that we have to get to. Maybe next time I'll try to explain it. In other words, he says, of course, the nutritive soul can exist separately without a intellectual soul. How do I know? Because I know I've met cows, and they have nutritive souls, but they don't have intellectual souls, right? So, of course, that it can exist in that way, in one way. So that's even the reason why we even talk about this as different souls or different parts. Otherwise, we wouldn't even talk about it different parts. If something can't exist ever separately in any way, then it's not even a different part, right? It's just the same thing. For example, I'll give you an example. Example here, right? Because you have people. This is a difficulty. I'm going to finish here. For example, you have difficulty because people have, and not only the Rambam here gives 5 parts of the soul. Okay, there's 5 parts. But if you actually get into the details, you see that he has the Gra has a list of 70, but he copy pasted that from some philosopher. He actually can't. The nutritive part does a whole bunch of activities, right? Mm-hmm. It takes in food, it pushes out the food, it digests food. These are already 3 things. So why did we decide that this is one thing, right? In what sense? My question is basic. No, because I'm basically asking you a basic question. The Rambam has this theory. Don't say there's 3 souls. Say there's parts of a soul. There's a certain amount of parts, but they're the same soul at different parts, and there's a certain list of parts, right? Now, what I'm trying to get at is what do these definitions mean? What difference does it make to say 1 soul with 3 parts or 3 souls that do 3 things? It sounds like there's no difference, right? There's a different formula, but the same thing, right? And one way of noticing that problem is that if he just counted activities, he should have counted many more activities. And he himself counts many more activities.
Which activities define?
Why are some activities a part? In other words, why these activities are making it parts, or what he calls parts in some sense, and not a different soul. Exactly. So if we understand this, so basically at least one thing we can understand, and there's more to understand, but we're getting tired. But one thing we can understand is that a part being one thing means everything else about it can't exist otherwise. In other words, if we take nutrition as a thing, well, you could ask why is this a thing? But what is you and what you get going on here, right? Nutrition is a thing. In other words, it's a thing because that's what allows, or that's what it is, living things to live. If they don't have nutrition, they can't live. You can't live.
Actually interdependent.
Exactly. So you can't have taking in food without digesting that food and making it part of yourself. That would be useless. That would not be life. That would be something else. It would be like me putting things into a cup, but it wouldn't be life, right?
Now with systems, right? Respiratory systems.
Exactly. Of course, we have this kind of. By the way, all of biology is Aristotelian. That's not, of course, not. All the people claim, but that's different. Point is, of course, we have that. This is a system, exactly. But not getting it. But you can't have these parts. So therefore, these are one part. They do one thing. Now, of course, they do one thing by a bunch of activities. But no parts, they don't really have parts. They have parts in some sense, but these parts can't be separated ever. Okay? So that's what makes them parts into one part and not into 17 different parts. Okay? Versus, now, if you go backwards, the nutritive soul can exist without anything else because we have cows. They exist without intellectual souls. Okay? But, for example, he claims that the nutritive soul never exists without a vegetative soul. Now, that's a condition, it's a one-way condition, right? You can't have something that senses without it also growing and having nutrition. That's what he claims, and he claims it both empirically. He looked around, and he did look around and everything he could and found that this is true. And conceptually, like metaphysically, he tries to show why it must be this way. The world couldn't be different. And he says the same thing otherwise. For example, he thinks that the sense of touch is the basic sense which makes animals into animals, and no other sense can exist without touch, although some animals have touch without other senses. But you can't have only sight without touch, right?
Can I?
No, I'm gonna finish because I hope. So in other words, let me go back. So when we say that human lives by the human nutritive soul, what we mean, at least one thing that has to do with it, meaning is that the human doesn't have. That the human soul is a one thing. In other words, humans which have intellectual parts, their intellectual parts need their nutritive parts, need conceptually, need metaphysically, they can't exist otherwise, which is another way of saying that this is a different kind of thing. It does a whole bunch of different things. There's not parts that can be separated because they can't be separated. They can be separated one way, but they can't be separated. In a human, they can't be separated. They can be separated conceptually. There are different activities. We can understand the activity. We can even, study the medical part maybe the same way. There's halacha that Chazayim have the same digestion system as humans, and therefore, whatever. We can study them in the same way maybe, but they're metaphysically not the same thing. Because the human one is one that both thinks and eats. And that's a different kind of thing than the thing that, this is also to answer another question I'm going to say in a minute. So people that are listening to my recording then have more time to pause on. Which is, and people ask this question, I think that if you think this way, you realize that it's not a real question. But if people not only ask this question, I've noticed people actually using this logic to sort of disprove the Rambam's ethics. Because the Rambam's ethics, Aristotle's ethics, are based on human function, right? So he's based on, you could see the Rambam describe it at length in the Akdama to Perusha Mishnah, right? Which is, what is humans for? We have to find what humans do specifically, right? And that's what humans would be for, right? So since humans and animals both eat, obviously eating is not human, eating is animal, right? But since only humans think, so humans are for thinking and not for eating. Of course, they need to eat in order to think, as it says in Perikei over here. Now, some people have asked that this is contradicted. Not only some people, smart people like her, and I think that just don't understand what's going on, ask that this seems to contradict what it says here. And the language definitely contradicts. So he often uses this language. Says when you eat, you're just being a chazer. Because you and a chazer eat the same exact way. Right. When you think, you're being human. Now, you read Shemona Perek and Perek Aleph, and say he explicitly denies that. You don't eat like a chazer, you eat like a man. And we can even find a misap way to say it. You eat with a bracha, so you don't eat like a chazer. Well, the Rambam might want to. This might be. This is of course true for the Rambam. The Rambam says Kol Masech V'Lishan Shema. In other words, he understands the one way this dependence. Of course, in order for a man to think, he needs to eat, and therefore his eating is part of being a man. It's not part of an animal because its goal is something else. But that doesn't mean that now you can have a goal of eating. The whole thing Rambam against people, Rambam is like asceticism sort of, where he denies that eating is a good thing. It's not because he doesn't think it's a thing that's needed. The opposite, he thinks that it's important. Not only that, he thinks that it's a mitzvah because it's a preparatory mitzvah to the goal. But it can't be the goal. It's the opposite. That the person, in other words, it's almost precisely the opposite. If there would be a separate soul which would eat and a separate soul which would think, there might have been a secondary human goal which is eating. This is actually what the Mekwalim think. But since there is only one soul, therefore the only goal is to think. And the other things are subservient to that. Of course, we need them. Humans can't think without a body. Or maybe angels could, but humans can't think without eating first. But so it's the opposite. And I think this sort of makes sense to me. If it doesn't, come back next week and we'll go through a whole other way of trying to explain it to making it more better, clear. Thank you very much.
Sure.